All right, so we're continuing in the book of Leviticus. In the last video, we covered in the first two parshas the offerings, the different types of animals, birds, or grains that would be brought within the tabernacle by the priests, and we spoke about the different types and the basic reasons why they would be brought. Now in parsha number 3, we're going to focus on the priesthood. We have the inauguration of the priesthood, where the Torah actually describes the ceremony by which Aaron becomes the high priest and his sons who become priests. What happened? It was actually an 8-day ceremony, the 8th day being the climax of it all, when the priesthood now becomes an official institution within the Jewish people. Now, in terms of getting clear, in terms of priests, the Levites, Kohen, Levi, a lot of times people get confused, and I think it's important to point out now the differences. So first of all, the Levites, they're one of the 12 tribes of Israel. They're one of the 12 tribes, and within the Levites, there was the most famous family, that of Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. And in fact, it's worthwhile to point out Miriam was the eldest sibling. She was a prophetess. Then you had Aaron, who was a prophet, and he became Moses' spokesman. And then we have Moses. Aaron was actually older than Moses by 3 years. Moses was the prophet. He was the redeemer, the one who led the redemption from Egypt, and he becomes ultimately the lawgiver at Mount Sinai, which we covered in the book of Exodus, and which he's going to do continuously throughout the story of the Torah. So those are the Levites. They're one of the 12 tribes. Therefore, they're a significant population within the Jewish people at that time. In terms of the priest, the Hebrew word for priest is Kohen. And Aaron becomes the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. And it's in this parsha, the third parsha, where we have his inauguration in that role, as well as his sons become the priests. Now, I think it's important to point out that really Moses was meant originally to be the high priest of the Jewish people. Where's my pointer? Here it is. He was supposed to be the high priest of the Jewish people. But back in the book of Exodus, in that first parsha, he was there for 7 days trying to convince God that he was not appropriate to be the one to take the Jews out of Egypt. There was someone who was going to be more appropriate because Moses, he felt, he had a speech impediment. He couldn't even represent God properly in front of Pharaoh. So eventually God tells Moses that he will appoint Aaron to become Moses' spokesman. And that's what happens back in the book of Exodus. And tradition teaches at that moment, Moses was told that originally he was meant to be the high priest. He's going to lose that position, and now Aaron has become the high priest of the Jewish people. And now anybody who's a direct descendant of Aaron, passed father to son, is a Kohen, is a priest. In fact, the Technion, which is a university in Haifa in Israel, they did a study a number of years ago where they said if this is in fact a bloodline that goes all the way back to Aaron, passed father to son, there should be some unique marker on the Y chromosome, which is passed father to son. And in fact, they did find a unique mark, which they now label the Kohen gene. Anyway, that's the priest. Now, in terms of family names, I think it's neat to point out that there are certain names which tip off that the family belongs to this bloodline. So, for example, we have Cohen or Khan or Cohen or Kahana. Those would be obviously names that link a person to being a Kohen. Also, we have Kagan. A lot of people from Russian descent, they're known as Kagans. In Russian, there isn't a H sound. That's replaced by a G sound. So Kagan is Kohen from Russian. Then we have Katz. Katz is actually a combination of Kohen Tzedek, which means righteous priest. And then there's also Zach. Zach comes from the word Zera Kodesh, which means holy seed. And in our tradition, we know that it's a privilege to be a Kohen, also to be a Levi. Whenever there's an honor, like being called up to the Torah or leading the grace after meals, a Kohen is always asked first to do so. Now, going back to our parsha here, there is a major calamity that happens. See, Aaron is married to a woman named Elisheva. She was from the tribe of Judah. Her brother is famous. His name was Nachshon. He was the first one to jump into the Red Sea when the waters split. Now, they had 4 sons. They had Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar. So at this point in the Torah, even though there's a whole tribe, 1/12 of the Jewish people are Levites, there are only Aaron and his 4 sons who are actually the Kohanim, the priests, grand total of 5. But at the inauguration ceremony, Nadav and Avihu, these 2 sons, they decide on their own to bring an unauthorized incense offering into the tabernacle. God had told Aaron and Moses what should happen that day. They decide to do something on their own as a personal expression of participation, and a fire comes down from the heavens, and they're consumed right there in front of the children of Israel, just as the priesthood is being established. and Aaron and his sons are thrown into mourning as a result. So it's a tragedy that strikes right at that moment, and there's a lot to learn to understand from that episode. So that occurs right here. One other thing I want to point out from parsha number 3, people should know that this is where the dietary prohibitions are first mentioned in the Torah. They're going to be spoken about in other parshas as well, but the issue in terms of which meats one can eat, which birds, which fish, and so on, it's all introduced here in parsha number 3, and nowhere will you find anything to do with issues of health. It's more an issue of purity, and I think it's easy to see that now that we've established this idea of a priesthood, there is an idea that we, the Jewish people who are a kingdom of priests, have a certain diet to maintain a certain spiritual purity, and that's what the foods are going to be about. But we'll talk about that more in a different video. So that is a summation of what happens in parsha number 3 in a nutshell. Okay, it's now time for a little review, and here we go. Let's get rid of everything, and let's begin. The first 2 parshas we know deals with the offerings, and 3 is the inauguration of the priesthood. Remember, the Levites are one of the 12 tribes. Miriam was a prophetess. Aaron also was a prophet, as well as Moses' spokesman. Moses was a prophet, redeemer, and lawgiver. In terms of the priests, who are in Hebrew known as Kohanim or Kohanes, Aaron becomes the first high priest, and from this point on, anybody who is a direct descendant of Aaron is a high priest. And we have the story in the inauguration where Aaron and Elisheva, they have 4 sons, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar. 2 of the sons, Nadav and Avihu, bring this incense offering, which is unauthorized, and they get consumed by the altar, and tragedy strikes. And the parsha concludes, amongst other things, focusing on the dietary prohibitions.